Hey, bike fans, let's do the ride review on the 2021 Giant TCR Advanced Pro. I don't know if there's a number attached to this because this was the frame. If you go on Giant's website, order your Giant shop, and you buy the frame, the one without the ISM or integrated seat mast, this is what you're getting. So that's the only, I think it was the only option available. It's their advanced grade. You know, I think if you get the full ISM, there might be one with a little higher grade carbon, but this was the only thing available in a frame set without the ISM. I didn't want the ISM because I need to be able to travel with this bike. It needs to be able to fit in these bike boxes or one of these bike boxes. And a 60 centimeter bike with an ISM is not going to fit bike box. So I want to just talk about, we already did the bike check, and go check that video if you just want to see the details of how I spec this build and put it together in terms of parts and what have you. What I just want to do is talk about the ride qualities and then a little bit of living with this bike. One of the reasons I chose this bike over some other contenders was the lack or near lack of proprietary parts. So it's easy to live with and work with. The only thing proprietary on this bike is the steerer tube is 1.25 inches versus the standard in the industry, which is 1.125 inches, which limits your stem choice. So I have a Giant stem on here. I think Data, maybe 3T might make an OD2, which is the 1.25 inch standard for Giant, and also means if you're any spacers, you need to kind of stick with that. So that's the only thing proprietary-ish with that. But other than that, standard parts on here, which was a big deal for me. So let's talk ride quality. And for me, on a big bike and someone who likes to go fast, that starts with front end stiffness. And this bike does great. I'm really happy with how it handles at speed downhill. Granted, with the pandemic, I haven't been able to travel to the West Coast and really rail it down some mountain descents. But really the key for me when it comes to head tube stiffness is when you're at extreme speeds and you're hit by funky winds, how, is it susceptible to get that wobble? Like aero road bikes, in my experience at this size, are all susceptible to that. Even some of the stiffest ones like the Argon 18 Nitrogen and even the Giant, name escapes me, the Giant's aero version of this bike. Those are two of the stiffest I've ever been on, and they still get some wobble when you're going 50 miles an hour dead straight. And that's really where the front end can tell the truth, because when you're going dead straight, you're very neutral on the bike. You're not putting any torque, from the handlebar and putting some angles into it to offset any vibrations. You're just going dead straight, which is pretty common here in Texas. If you are going 50 miles an hour in Texas on a road bike, you're almost always going dead straight on usually chip seal, so it's kind of rough. So the bike's very susceptible to winds and can be wobbly. And I'm happy to report, in the limited experience I've had here in Austin, I've had it above 50 miles an hour, but in Austin, it's usually for a few seconds at a time because the hills are that short, but they are very steep. It's been pretty good. Been pretty happy with it. I do run some deep wheels. I know those can give some issue on an exposed descent. So 54 deep in the front, 62 in the rear. I have balanced the wheel, which I have. So if you don't know about wheel balancing, on a wheel, there's some reinforcements both in the wheel. The tube is a little bit more reinforced, plus the valve is here. All that extra weight is where the valve is. So if you have a unbalanced wheel and you just spin it, and then you walk away from it and you come back, the valve is going to be at the bottom because it's the heaviest bit to offset. And that also leads to wobble at high speed or some vibration at high speed. So to offset that, you put lead tape and then they have it covered with electrical tape. So it's a little more discreet here. I have it balanced. And so the front end's been great. It really has been great. The other thing to be concerned about with front end on a bike in terms of stiffness is how it handles when you're putting down power out of the saddle. So you're wrenching back and forth on the handlebar and putting that lateral torque down into the axle. And the telltale would be brake rub on a rim brake, obviously up top, On disc brake, you would hear that, you know, that samurai sword sound, either in a sprint or in an out of the saddle climb. And I haven't heard the brake rub from that at all. So front end has been great. A lot of that has to do with the thicker steer. So I'm a big fan of that. So far, so good. The other ride quality is stiffness in the rear. And it's usually that last thing is really where you notice the stiffness in the rear. How does it feel when you snap? You're already going 300-400 watts and then you snap for a sprint. Do you feel like the bike is holding its true line? Because that torque, you know, could put some torque into the bike and make it not feel as sure-footed when you're already going fast and then you step on it harder to get out of the saddle to punch around or throw down a sprint. You know, you want the bike to feel confident and true, and it really does. I have no complaints there. And modern bikes, you know, modern bikes from the big manufacturers, that's always going to be the case right now. Very few are wobbly back here. They've really figured that out. But is it stiff enough that I don't hear the brake rub? That is true. I'm not hearing the brake rub when I put down a sprint or climb out of the saddle. So in terms of stiffness, I give it an A, not quite an A plus, but I give it an A. It does pretty solid. The other one is that word compliance. You know, is it a comfortable ride? That's hard to tell, to be honest, because this is the first dedicated road bike for me that I'm doing big miles on that I'm able to fit a 28 millimeter tire. So any comfort compared to, you know, say the gallium up here that is getting sanded for paint, that only holds a 25, is a really comfortable bike. Don't get me wrong, it has very wispy seat stays, so it is really comfortable, especially on some of the bigger, chunkier roads. But the 28 mil tire is the difference maker, and that's kind of, you know, if you're like me coming from, you know, 21s, 20s, 23s, then 25 last few years, and now 28s, it's like riding on clouds. It's fantastic. Plus I run latex, always have, and that can make a big difference. So it is comfortable, but it's hard to compare it to anything else. I do feel like it does have, you know, it's not as stiff if you hit, I won't say pothole, but like dips in the road where it really kind of digs in. I would say it's probably not as compliant or compliant at all in that situation. It just doesn't have that give, doesn't have that flex here. Part of that may be to do this guy, and this is kind of where I'll shift to talking about what the bike kind of looks like. Am I, you know, after having it for a while, does it still excite me? I mean, you want to like your bike, right? You want to be stoked about it. And I would say, yes, I am. And I'd say the only thing that's weird about this bike is this yoke. Like, what is this? This big chunk. And I'm sure it's a manufacturing thing. My guess is this allows Giant to use the same rear triangle on a disc bike as they would on a rim brake bike. So all that's missing here is the drill out and whatever needs to be in there to mount a rim brake. And so that's just a manufacturing hack. So they don't have to make two different chainstays or rear triangles, excuse me. So it looks a little funny. That gets all muddy and dirty when you're riding. Maybe it's saving, you might get lucky, and maybe it's saving some of that from flinging forward and down into your legs and your shoe and that sort of stuff. But, you know, it's kind of weird looking. I don't know, maybe I should put a sticker or something. In terms of how it looks, you know, on the bike check, I talk about how it has classic lines. It really does. And it's, I think that's one, for me personally, I like that, the classic lines. It is a compact geometry with the TCR, total compact road. Or maybe it's total compact race. I think it's road. Anyway, they invented, I'm air quoting, invented the compact design where the top tube slopes down a little bit. Obviously it's not level, so you can't really see that. Slopes down a little bit, and everybody does that now, even just a little bit. The last holdout was the Cannondale Super 6 before they went to the kind of the arrow looking one. That had basically a flat top tube up until the latest version. And that was really the last holdout from the big manufacturers to shift to a compact geometry where that thing slopes down. The other thing that gives it a classic line is the chainstay, or the seat stay, is dropped slightly, but not nearly as much as we're seeing on the current generations of bikes. And it doesn't have crazy bladed forks and things for all the aero nods. Like the Madone looks like an aero road bike now. It doesn't look like a road bike. So they had to come out with another one you know, they're climbing, they call it a climbing bike now. And I think Specialized, same thing with their tarmac. Now they have another bike to replace that gives you these classic lines. Well, Giant just didn't innovate, and now it's back in style, which is kind of funny. Apart from some, you know, some of those aeronauts, it has a kind of a truncated cam tail here and on the forks. But I love the look of it. It looks great. Branding, very subtle, just Giant on the down tube, TCR on the top tube, and on the inside of the fork, there's a little black, you can't even see it on camera, it says advanced carbon. And then same thing on the other side of this chainstay, it says advanced carbon. So it looks great, is comfortable. And the last one is living with it. Again, I told you, I picked this bike above some other candidates because lack of proprietary, especially in the cockpit. And I wanted to run mechanical and still be able to work on it, and it does great. So the derailleur cable housings come in here, they terminate here, and then they connect into an inner sleeve. So the cable runs inside this sleeve all the way down the tube to the bottom, and there's another sleeve coming from this side. So fishing, I just replaced the cables because I like to replace those every 25 or 100 miles or so, just before they blow up inside the shifter. And it's super easy to run. Just ran right through there, connected it, boom, you're done. Front, same thing. There's an inner sleeve right in there. It runs all the way down, and I actually have it still on the cable down in here. So that cable, there's a sleeve covering it. It's coming from inside the frame. So super easy routing, and of course hydraulic. It is what it is. You're not really having to service it as long as you keep it bled and all that sort of thing. I don't see any problems with that. In terms of disc brakes now, I can't say I have too many complaints about them, apart from the fact that, and you guys can all comment about how deep my wheels are, all that kind of stuff, but same bike to same bike, going from disc brakes to rim brakes is about a 2-pound penalty. That may come down in the future, but it is about a 2-pound penalty, and that's a bummer because my Galleon was essentially a 15-pound bike, and it was as light, you know, the lightest parts you could have on it for a big bike, and this is now a 17-pound bike. It could be a little less than that, you know, if I had the same wheels on there, if I had some lighter wheels. Envy, hey, shout out, could you make a 20 mil deep climbing wheel with disc brakes? I know you don't make that 2.2, you don't make that in disc brake. I don't want that. Anyway, live with them, not too bad. So this is a little heavier, but I'm a big dude. So honestly, I'm just complaining. I'm just pissing, just shouting into the wind, to the void. It doesn't really matter. In terms of rub and some of those things, yeah, there is a tendency to, like if you have to stop at a stoplight and it's a downhill, so you're holding the brakes the whole time, when you ride away, it takes a minute for the brake to not release, but to fully, for the calipers to go back in there so it's not rubbing. So you get a little ting, ting, ting sound when in that situation, or if you're bombing a long hill and you have to ride the brake for a minute, there's a little bit of a slow to rebound. But in terms of all the other conditions, I don't see that as being a problem. I did have to, one time after I built it, I think I showed you this cable, this hose was too long. I had to shorten that, and that was a bit of a pain in the butt. And brake pad life is a little less than probably rim brakes. I got about 2,000 miles out of the front one, and I'm gonna get about 4,000 because I'm about to change this rear one in the rear. So that means about a 2-to-1. So when I replace that, this is probably gonna need to be replaced as well. So I'm gonna get 2 sets of front brake pads to 1 set of the rear. And so I'm doing about 2,000, 4,000 miles on those in Texas. And again, I don't really ride in the rain. You don't have to here in Texas. There just isn't enough of it. And yeah, and I'm a bigger dude again. I'm 190 pounds. So I do burn through those, and I do descend pretty hard. I like to go fast. So anyway, the Dura-Ace mechanical's been fine. Everything else has been fine. Been a great bike. I'm happy with it. Really gotten to know it over the last 4,000 or so miles. Looking forward to actually traveling and go and find some real climbing with it. So, ride on.